Yep, what's up, folks? Welcome to Ichabod. I am your host, Be Good, and this is typically exit strategy, but it's not going to be exit strategy tonight. We're going to do conversations with Christians, and so welcome everybody. Come on into the chat, and we're going to be streaming to two channels tonight. We'll be streaming Ichabod and Eric Hernandez's channel. So if you're here from Eric's channel, welcome, and if you're here a regular Ichabodian, come on into the chat. You know how we do here. Greet somebody in reason's name. And if you are not an Ichabodian, still come into the chat and say what's up. Ambassador LPW, what's happening? Daryl Williams, thank you guys for sliding through. This is going to be a great discussion, I believe. This is part two. I say round two. I only say that to hype it up because it's not really a round. Like, this is not like a, I've said this before. I don't think I got a chance to say this last time when I had Eric on. So I wonder if some of his guests, well, you know what? I'm gonna just start right now and just bring Eric in because I want to know what he thinks about this. I'm very curious. So rather than do my usual wait for everybody to come into the chat, I'm going to bring Eric in and get some of his thoughts on this. So welcome to Ichabod. Welcome back to Ichabod. What's up, Eric?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Chilling, man. How you be?
Good. Thank you for having me on again. It's an honor and pleasure.
Yeah, good stuff. So I don't know if you did what I did. I looked at the comments on my channel, and then when I saw that you reposted the entire video, I looked at the comments on your channel, and the comments it's night and day. The people that are watching it on my stream are like, yo, what is Eric talking about? Da, 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 da. And then the people that are watching it on your channel, like, yo, what is this guy, what is Be Good talking about? So I'm just curious, what did you see the comments on both channels, and what did you make of what people made of the discussion?
Yeah, permission to speak freely.
Yes, please.
And I'll say this as gently as I can. And this is not just unique to one particular worldview, because Christians can fall in the same boat as well. But given that you asked concerning the two channels, I often, like, for example, and I don't remember if this was my channel or your channel, but one atheist said something like, atheists don't put a lot of, I'm paraphrasing, stock into philosophy. And I thought, well, that's the problem. Now, again, that, Christians can do the same thing too. But what I find oftentimes in these kind of discussions, because you have low-hanging fruit on both sides, right? But that oftentimes people don't understand arguments or can't follow them. And so they just, it's as if I can't understand it, therefore it's ridiculous or it's nonsense. And what I often get, because, again, haters on both sides, you get a lot of times atheists are like, Eric sounds ridiculous. And I'm just like, great rebuttal, because that's not a response to anything I'm saying, and vice versa. So, I mean, yeah, you're always going to have those who are like, oh, their team won, it wasn't a debate, but you get what I'm saying. But then you also have those people who are going to just, talk down on the other side, regardless of how good or bad they objectively did. And then you have those people who are on the fence and are genuinely looking at it. And those they don't comment as often as I'd like them to, but then you have those as well.
Yeah, appreciate that. And yeah, like you said, it wasn't a debate. And I wonder if some of the folks who don't know who I was or don't know what we even were trying to do, it wasn't a debate. And to be honest, I didn't know much about you before we got on the live. Matter of fact, it wasn't until after the live that I was like, I think either you told me or Dillahunty told me when I was on with Dillahunty last week that he had did a debate with you. And then I went and checked out some of the debate. I said, so this guy's been doing this for, I had no idea. All I knew was my other guest said, hey, there's another Christian you can talk to. He, put us in a group chat together on Facebook. Yeah. So I had no clue. And a lot of what was happening last week, I do this to have discussions with folks. I don't go into this like there's going to be a winner, there's going to be a loser or whatever. But I think I would have prepared a little more to know some of the terms and the jargon that you were using just on the philosophical tip. I'm not a philosopher. I've never studied formal logic. And so anyway, I say all that to say the discussion that I wanted to have, we got somewhere, but I think it'll be more substantive tonight, just now that I know what your specialty is, or would you say, like, are you formally trained in philosophy? Like, what is your background?
Technically, no. I mean, I have my last bachelor's I did study philosophy, but I mean, technically, no, not formally trained. Just
Okay,
passionately curious, as I think
got you.
Einstein once said. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things, oh, I'm sorry, real quick. Oh, there was something I was trying to remember and I just remembered what it was. I'm going to say this a couple of times tonight, Icopodians. And I mean, if you hear from Eric's channel, you could do the same. I mean, you could help out as well. So what happened? I posted this on Facebook today. There is a friend of mine, and actually, I forgot, Eric, you were a cross movement, like you were supporter of cross movement back in the day, correct? You knew us.
Yes, sir.
Did you know us back in the day when there was a guy in the group named Enoch? Did you go back
Yeah.
that far?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. He came to my
So
church one time,
Enoch,
actually.
really?
Yeah. Yeah. Back in the day.
In where?
South Houston.
Oh, you're in Houston? You're in
So
Texas?
I grew up in Houston.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so before he went to Texas, of course, he was a Philly native. He and I were in Philadelphia. Um, but he had a family here in Philadelphia before he moved to Houston. Before he moved, yeah, to Houston. His wife, who is the mother of two of his children, um, she's in a situation right now where she ended up homeless. Her and her daughter were renting a place, and they didn't know that the place that they were renting got sold, and immediately they were homeless. And so they're right now living in a hotel. They weren't financially prepared for this, and she hit me up just last night. She's working 3 jobs. She was working 2 jobs. Now she's working 3 just to try to like get enough money to get them in a stable place. So on my Facebook, I started a GoFundMe. This is for Crystal James, the wife of one of our former Cross Movement members. I just put the GoFundMe for her in the chat. We are trying to. Did it come up in 2 different? I think it came up in 2 different. How'd that happen? I think it came up in 2 different messages, maybe because it was so long. So here's what I'll do. If you can't, the first one worked. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
We're just trying to raise, I think it was $700 we're trying to raise to help her get her and her daughter into a spot. They can maintain the place on their own once they, get their next paychecks in a couple of weeks. But right now, they need some funds to be okay. So if you're Icopodian, please go support whatever you can give, $5, $10. I appreciate that. If you were going to super chat tonight, maybe instead of super chat, do that or split your super chat. But this is a good time to help somebody out. A great woman, great mother. And yeah, so that's there. I'll probably mention that again, but that's it. So yeah, Eric, I was saying, I think it would be good if we at least try to recap our understanding of our last conversation, or even if not a recap, just here's what stood out, or here's a point that you wanted to make, or maybe even if it's clarity that you wanted to get. And so I'll give you the floor since I've been talking for the last 2 minutes, just in case you wanted to say anything or just kind of, just represent your mindset on the last convo before we move forward tonight. And then I'll make a little statement, actually scripted something up, and I'll see if I can stumble through it here.
Not in particular. Just, I mean, from what I recall, it seemed that we were talking a lot on epistemology, and my underlying point was, if you have an undercutting defeater for trusting the rational reliability of any beliefs your brain produces, then you have an undercutting defeater for anything your brain produces, including the belief there's no God. This is typically comes from Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, or C.S. Lewis's argument from reason. And then from what I remember, your responses were, and I this is nothing I didn't say in the last show, that it seemed like just unmitigated skepticism of like, how can you be certain, or how do you know, which don't, in my opinion, answer the point of the argument, because, to just posit skepticism is, to me, a dime a dozen. It doesn't get us anywhere. As I mentioned in the last show, I like to live my life based on the evidence, the logic, the reason, and just saying, what if this, at least in my mind, doesn't get me to where I want to go, or what I'm looking for. And again, namely the evidence, the logic, and reason.
Appreciate that. I didn't plan on saying this, but since you said that, I wrote this into my summation. So my unmitigated, I mean, I think it's more methodological skepticism, but even if you call it unmitigated skepticism, my skepticism wasn't necessarily my response to your idea of a undercutting defeater to my position. My skepticism was a response to your, if our brains were not designed to obtain truth, then you can't trust the brain. And that was sort of it's kind of a roundabout way to get at God, right? If God hasn't designed our brains, that's sort of what the idea of if our brains weren't designed for truth, that's I wouldn't even say it's sneaking God in. I think you may have even made the statement that God is the one who designed our brains to obtain truth. And so my skepticism wasn't like, oh, this is just my position. It's how do you know that what formed our brains or allowed our brains to develop to aim for truth? How do you know that that has to be God? And that's where the skepticism came in. It wasn't just that our brains are not developed or formed or even fashioned for truth. Even if they were fashioned, that's why I brought in advanced species and aliens and all that. It wasn't like I'm just trying to obfuscate and not deal with it. It was, but how do you know it's God that did it? And that's sort of what the skepticism was about.
Yeah, to make a clarifying point there. So that was one like a side piece toward the overall argument, because the overall argument is, let's assume there's no God. Natural selection has brought us about. Is that we know? So this is not a guess or estimation, but that we know that natural selection at best is going to aim at survival value, not truth value.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, that's why I mentioned in the other shows, it's like a backdoor approach to the existence of God. Either atheism is true or theism is true. If one of those are false, then the other is true by default, given, it's either A or not A. It's a genuine dichotomy. And so if we know that our cognitive faculties aim at survival value, not truth value, then that puts truth in the hindmost. And I quoted Patricia Churchland, an atheist philosopher of science, who said that whatever truth is, it takes a backseat to this in our development.
Yeah. And that actually goes into the little thing I scripted up. I think it's two separate sections. I'll kind of read it off here, but that goes right into what you were just saying. One of the things I do appreciate about our conversation was it helped me crystallize something, because both you, I think you were Monday of last week, and then Saturday of last week, I had a conversation with a different Christian, a Christian who read my book, and he's done 15 videos about my book, aiming to debunk my book. And so I had him on last Saturday. And I think both you and he keyed in on on the same sentence in my book. And that was the sentence where I say in the foreword, the truth of the matter is that truth matters. And it wasn't until I thought back about you and our conversation yesterday that it actually hit me that I never actually deconverted or deconstructed why truth matters. Like that sort of was my when I began writing that book, that was 2021. And so when I said the truth of the matter is that truth matters, that was the old Christian me still talking. But in talking with you last week, I actually for the first time had to say, well, wait, why does truth matter? And in talking with you, I sort of stumbled through what I was willing to say in the moment, but then having thought about it some more, I think I'm really ready to stand behind it. And so here's what I ended up saying to the question of, well, if I'm talking to me, why does truth matter? Or if you would have asked me, why does truth matter? The reason we care about true things is because we want, or should I say, we benefit from having a trustworthy understanding of our environment. And this goes back to what you were just talking about truth taking a backseat to survivability. If we do not have a reliable interpretation of our surroundings, then we'll run afoul of reality. At some point, we're going to run into something that's not like we think it is, and that's going to lessen our survival chances. And so you gave the example of a person believing that he's Superman, and because he's Superman, he believes he can withstand the impact of an oncoming car. But if he believes he's Superman, he's also Clark Kent and wants to keep that identity concealed. And so the survival value of believing he's Superman, but wanting to keep that identity concealed, would make him move out of the way of a car instead of taking that oncoming impact. And so a untruth in that situation could produce something that gave him better survivability, because if he's not Superman, the car would have killed him. one of the reasons why I was struggling with that last week, as you saw me kind of stumble through how I responded to that, was it's not that his false belief produced the survival, um, the thing that allowed him to survive that incident. It was a corollary desire with that false belief, the corollary desire of keeping his identity concealed, and then moving out of the way of the car to keep his identity is what allowed him to survive, not the false belief. So even in the idea of false beliefs helping you survive, that wasn't an example of that. And I was struggling with trying to make sense of that. But either way, my response with last week and now, as I thought more about it, is I think what we want is not just false beliefs that could, in certain scenarios, produce more survivability. What we want is beliefs that in more than just one scenario, in most scenarios, would give us more survivability, would increase our chances of survivability. And so false beliefs are not going to do that. And so that's why I think truth matters. And I think I said this somewhere towards the end of our conversation. It's not just truth for truth's sake. It's truth to that end. Now, you may have already responded to that last week, but having heard what I just said, like, would you agree or disagree with that?
I would agree with some of it, disagree with some of it. So okay. I think even last week it sounded like you conceded, and maybe even now, that false beliefs can produce adaptive behavior and survival value. And so
in some circumstances, yeah.
So the argument isn't that truth is irrelevant to survival altogether. I'm not saying that we can't have true beliefs. I'm saying that if there's no God, then so maybe I can give an example here. So you're no longer a believer, no longer Christian, no longer believe in the Christian God. And yet that is the biggest religion in the world. I say that because here, on your view, if your view is correct, here you have a prime example of a false belief that is 100% increasing survivability. You know, you look at the statistics. That
hold on.
Sure.
I'm sorry. What's the false belief?
Assuming your worldview is true, Christianity would be the false belief. Or any religion would be the false belief, right? And yet, statistically speaking, religious people tend to thrive more, live longer, things of that nature. And so that is a prime example of a false belief, according to your worldview, producing survivability, even though that belief is not true. So sure, we want beliefs that not just increase survivability, but that are also true. The question is, how can we get there? And my argument aims to demonstrate that any belief produced by your brain is undercut.
I don't know how much we want to chase that, but I would say it's not that, because even if you put Christianity on trial and said, does Christianity increase people's longevity? I would say it depends on how you practice your Christianity. If you go around snake handling because the Bible says you could hold snakes and they won't kill you, that's not going to increase your chance of survivability. So it's not necessarily that religion does that. I think it's certain tenets in religion, and you can find some of those same tenets, like all things in moderation. You can find that in Stoicism. You can find that in a lot of different religions. And so I don't know that it's religion in and of itself. And you might find this interesting. I had a guy on a couple of weeks ago. He's been on the program twice. He's a deconverted Christian who still prays. He's an atheist, and he still gives his problems to God. And I asked him, like, how are you? He says, if we evolved to be religious, we must have thought there was some survival value in that belief system. And so I don't want to rob myself of something that as a species we developed to help us. And I said, but if you don't believe it, how is it really helping you? And he says, the reflex of, I can't solve this problem, let me give it to God, that reflex has still been helpful for him not stressing. Doesn't mean there's any truth to it. It just means it helps him. And I'm like, I don't know if I could do that. I want as many true beliefs as possible, or at least unfalsifiable beliefs. And that's a whole other part of the conversation.
Without chasing the falsifiable rabbit trail, because I think that is ultimately self-defeating, that standard. But yeah, I mean, it just goes back to, without going in circles or repeating myself, it goes back to the argument that if false beliefs produce survival and adaptive behavior. Oh, and as a side note too, so my good friend of mine, Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy, he's done debates on whether or not Christianity is good, and the statistics on what's better for society. And yeah, the studies do show that Christianity increases lots of value in so many areas. And if, again, your worldview is true, then you have a clear example of a false belief increasing survivability and adaptive behavior. And interesting to what your friend said, or the guy you had on who's not a Christian but still prays. Now, the crazy thing is that on my worldview, not only is it helpful and helps us survive, it's also true. And it makes sense that something that is true, which goes back to kind of a pushback most people give to the argument, is that, well, true things are going to help us survive more. Sure, I think so. And that would make sense with Christianity being true and these religious practices being within Christianity. Now, are some of these practices found in other religions? Absolutely, of course. No lie can be sold if there's not some truth in it. But without going down that rabbit trail, I would say that, I think we've kind of rehashed that it wasn't just that your brain's not designed for truth, but that we specifically know if there's no God, it's the main goal of survivability and adaptive behavior, not truth. That takes a backseat. And one last thing I'll say is, because even from reading your book, even from our talk last time, it seemed that you held to like a pragmatic view of truth, where as opposed to a correspondence theory of truth, where truth, what matters is that it works, and that's what makes it quote unquote true, and not necessarily objectively true, but pragmatically true. And I have issues with that, epistemically speaking, because I don't want just what works. I want what is objectively true, independent of whether or not I believe it. And I want to believe, as you said, as many true things as possible, and believe as little false things as possible.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that I hold to a pragmatic view of truth over a correspondence view of truth. I think a correspondence view of truth is the most pragmatic view of truth. So I would marry the two. But the idea of objectivity is another thing I wanted to address, because I saw people in the comments, especially on your channel, and I think you even said it last week, and I tried to clear it up, where I was making statements about we don't have access to objective truth. And you challenged that was an objective statement that I was making. And I was trying to say, no, I'm not saying that that's an objective thing. And people on your channel were saying he's objectively saying there's no objective truth. And that's not what was happening. I think I need to clear that up for people. Even tonight, most of the things I'm going to say, I would like you to receive them as me offering these things as provisional statements, because I do believe that we don't have access to objective truth. I cannot say that objectively. I can only say that as someone having an objective experience. But I think in saying that, what we're doing is we're offering people ways to fortify or falsify the things that we're willing to accept as true. So I think the best that we have is access to our subjective understanding. And because of that, we should look for as many ways to test or confirm our understanding as possible, not with bias, but with humility. And yeah, so that's as much as I'll say on that note. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, I don't know how else to put it, but I mean, because when you make the statement that we don't have access to objective truth, in order for that statement to be legitimate and correspond with reality, it has to be objectively true that we don't have access to objective truth. And this is why some of the comments you may have read were talking about that self-defeating aspect that you were committing there. I don't think the correspondence view of reality of truth is the most pragmatic, because I don't like mosquitoes. It's true that mosquitoes exist and they suck my blood, and I don't like that. So it would be pragmatic for me to believe things, other things that don't make my life so stressful. And there are other truths that I'm just uncomfortable with. We talked about hell last week. I remember Clay Jones was talking about when he was teaching a class on the afterlife. They talked about hell. A Christian raised his hand and said, "How can I be more comfortable with this topic?" Or how can I get to a place where the question of hell doesn't make me uncomfortable? And Clay Jones says it should never make you comfortable. So yeah, there's no pragmatism there in my mind, at least not for a Christian who is just wanting a happy-go-lucky puppies and candy canes kind of life. But yeah, I'll just reiterate that to say we don't have access to objective truth, for that to be true, it would have to be an objective claim that applies universally.
Yeah, and so I think we know I disagree, because I think, like I said, saying we don't have access to objective truth, I guess what I'm saying, so a lot of things, I think a lot of times when I'm talking in shorthand, And I'll spell it out, but I don't think I always want to spell it out. When I say we don't have access to objective truth, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think there's any way for us to know that what we're accessing is objectively true. We may be accessing truth objectively, but we're experiencing it subjectively. And I don't know how we would know that it is objectively true. I think all we can know is our subjective grasp on that. So when I say we don't have access to subjective truth, I'm talking about our ability to know that what we're calling true is objectively true.
Well, I mean, so it sounds very Kantian. So Kant talked about that we have and gosh, I should have looked these words up. That there's like the phenomenological world and the pneumological world. Don't quote me on those exact terms. But basically, it's like
No, those are his words. Those are his terms.
Okay, so we always have a set of shaded lenses on that we see the world through. So we never have access to the world as it is. And this goes back to why I guess you can say, for lack of a better phrase, even though it sounds a little bit pejorative, I accused you of being a skeptic, because the skeptic pretty much says, well, how do you know? How do you know? You know, it's like iterative skepticism. But yeah, as long as you have justified true belief, if you have a belief, it's true, and you have a rational justification for it, you can claim to have knowledge. Now, you can later find out you were wrong, but this is where we also talked about the question of certainty. I don't think certainty is a requirement for knowledge, because certainty is a property of my psychology, not a property of objective reality of whether or not something's true. So with skepticism, and I know I sent you my book, and it's only been a week, so I don't know if you got a chance to crack it open.
I didn't get a chance to, no.
Okay, no worries. So I have a whole chapter on skepticism where I kind of talk about some of what's interesting is a lot of the things that we were discussing last week and even today, I address in my book when it comes to skepticism on the skeptic mindset. It's pretty much, how do you know? Knowledge requires certainty, and then just skepticism toward everything.
Well, I wouldn't say knowledge requires certainty. I would say knowledge requires accuracy. But that's when the how do you know part comes in. How do you know that you're accurate, or how do you know how accurate you are?
So this gets, and I don't know if I go this deep in the book, but there's two questions within epistemology: whether or not we have knowledge, and how we are justified in that knowledge. What typically what's called a particularist starts with the view that yes, we have knowledge, and then kind of works out how it is that we are able to have this knowledge. We start with items of knowledge, and then we figure out how we're justified in them. Whereas a skeptic starts with the other question: how do we know that we know, or how can we know that we know, or verify that we know something? And basically, when you start with that question, you lead into an infinite regress. If I have to, so you mentioned my debate with Dillahunty, who is holds to what it seemed like from that debate, Methodism. You need a method for justifying every belief you have, but then that would lead to an infinite regress where you need a method. And then once you find a method, okay, then you ask, well, what method did you use to verify that method? And then you got to come up with another method. And then what you use, and it leads to an infinite regress, and then knowledge becomes impossible in skepticism. So I think the particularist view when it comes to epistemology is a correct one, where you start with particular items of knowledge and work from there. Otherwise, you would not be able to know anything. But then the moment you say, I don't know anything, well, that's a knowledge claim. And then now you know that you don't know anything, which means you have knowledge, and then you're back to being self-defeating. So this is why I think skepticism ultimately crumbles on itself.
So maybe, I don't know if you factor this in. Here's what I think a lot of times apologists don't recognize when they're dealing with skeptics. And I don't know, I haven't done a survey, but I would venture most people who are skeptics, especially if you're a methodological skeptic like I am, most people who are skeptics, I would venture to wager that the reason why most people are skeptics to the degree that I am is because they know what it's like to have been wrong. Not just to have been wrong, but to have been certain and been wrong. Once you I had one of my online friends, I never met him in person, but Michael Beverly, he was on my channel where I do these life after faith episodes where people talk about why they don't believe anymore. And I asked him if he would ever go back to Christianity or go back to religion or whatever. And one of the reasons why he said he never would is he says, I can't trust myself. I saw how sure I was when I was a Christian. And now I realize how wrong I was, because even if we don't have access to objective truth, one of the things we do have access to is falsifiability. This has been falsified, at least to the degree that we can ascertain. If the Bible tells me there's a dome in the sky covering the earth, and we go to the moon and we don't hit a dome, well, that's been falsified. at least in our experience. But I was so sure that my Bible was literal and was true and was accurate and was da 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 da. And all the things that I thought I was sure and I could be right about, I was wrong. That births some kind of skepticism going forward.
So yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that. So, I mean, this works on both sides, right? You have atheists. So I was in a documentary called Universe Design. Shameless plug for the producer who the film just came out, I think, last week. But he was an atheist for many years and then became a Christian. He was so sure atheism was true. There's a lot of atheists who are so sure atheism is true, and then they become Christians and they convert. So that, in other words, that cuts both ways. But I would just say, when you're talking about the dome, and I say this again as respectfully as possible, that just means you had bad theology. And I've had bad theology as well. So I know for sure what it's like to be wrong. But that doesn't justify me just going full-blown skepticism. So yes, of course, I know what it's like to be wrong. I know what it's like to hold a view adamantly and passionately. But it's almost like the skeptic overcorrects and goes from, I used to believe in a God, I used to believe this. It reminds me of Mormons that leave Mormonism. This is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but relevant. So I lead apologetic mission trips to Utah, and you have what are called Jack Mormons or former Mormons who, it's almost like a 50-50 split in Utah. You're either Mormon or atheist. And the reason being is like they think if Mormonism is false and they grew up believing it so adamantly, then if that's false, everything else, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I can't tell you how many Mormons I've talked to where the mentality is pretty much like, I don't want to be gypped again. I don't want to be misled again because I know how bad that felt. And so, but it's just going from one fundamentalism to another, in my opinion. You go from a religious, not you, but in these people I'm talking about, go from a religious fundamentalism to an epistemic atheistic fundamentalism, but it's still fundamentalism. So I think, we should follow the evidence where it leads, as uncomfortable as that may make us. And even because you can imagine, and I'm just, hypothetical here, where you were a Christian living for Christ, you become a non-believer. And if you became a believer once again, I mean, hey, you're not in a bad boat if you have claimed to constantly follow the evidence and the logic and the reasoning wherever that led, even if it made you uncomfortable, as you've expressed. And so you could have the same quote unquote conversion story coming back to Christ and still be a skeptic with certain theological beliefs. And I think Christians should be more open-handed with certain secondary, tertiary doctrines. It's unfortunate that they're not. That's part of what I do, is not just talking to non-believers, but also kind of, how can I put it gently, addressing the bad behavior in churches when it comes to how we want to make everything so close-handed. And if you don't believe in this particular view, you're not saved. If you don't believe in this age of the earth, you're not saved. And I think that's not biblical. That's not, aside from not helpful, again, not biblical, not something Scripture teaches, that we should be holding these things as putting them on pedestals so where we now disqualify people out of the kingdom. And so, yeah, it's perfectly fine for people to go from bad theology to better theology. I've done that many times myself, but that has never led me to skepticism.
Gotcha. All right, I'm going to play these video clips real quick because I pulled them. I don't want to use them. So I was trying to find a perfect analogy of what I thought was happening last week. And maybe this will land horribly, and I'll regret playing this, but I felt like when you were talking about my undercutter defeaters, like if my brain has not been designed to obtain truth, why would I trust it to tell me anything is true? And when I thought about that, I said, okay, it's almost like, well, correct me if I'm wrong. The problem with that is it's circular, right? I'm using my brain that wasn't designed to find truth to find truth. It's circular, and that's the undercutting defeater that you're talking about, right?
Not exactly. It's that. So going back to the microwave analogy, if I believe what time it is based on the microwave's reading, but then discover the power went out, so it's blinking 12 o'clock, I now have an undercutting defeater for whether or not it's 12 o'clock. It could be 12 o'clock. I just can't verify it, or I can't be justified by it, because the undercutting defeater comes to the fact that the power has gone out, and now the time that it's displaying has been tampered with. And I would say that's where the undercutter defeater comes in with naturalism via evolution.
And in my view, that's my view, right? in your view, if you're the person, you see the blinking, what do you go to? What do you appeal to know whether or not it actually is 12 o'clock or not? You need some other source, right?
Well, if given the analogy, you can't have another
Mhm.
source. So this is I addressed this in my discussion with Godless Granny. I don't know if you've heard of her, and I did a review on it. But
Mhm.
basically,
Yeah.
in other words, there's no source that you can go to outside your
No,
brain.
no, 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 not my view.
Oh,
For
I'm
your
sorry.
view, how would you in that situation
Oh,
determine whether or not
no.
the blinking clock was right or wrong?
Are we still talking? If we're talking about the analogy,
Yeah,
I would need a source that's not plugged into the power that was affected by the power outage.
perfect. That's what I was looking for. So I came up with another analogy that I think demonstrates my frustration with that conversation. So you play basketball? Did you play basketball at all ever as a kid on the playground or whatever?
Not really. I'm Hispanic and short, so it wasn't ever my game.
Well, I'm black and tall, and I still don't play basketball. But I remember out on the block. We put up a milk crate, and we play on the block. But in basketball, there's something called a self pass, right? A self pass is an illegal move. If you pass the ball, or if the ball leaves your hand in basketball, it cannot come back directly to you. Like it's got to hit the floor. You've got to be dribbling it. It's got to touch another player's hand and maybe pass it back, or you could throw it off the backboard, or whatever. So I'm going to show you two passes. This is the illegal pass. Now this is like in the playground, and this whole video is titled "Is This Illegal?" And everybody in the comments is saying, "Oh, well, in the playground we don't care about those kind of rules. Well, in the league you couldn't do that. On a real game you couldn't do that." I'll play it again. This guy's got to himself. All right, pass the ball to himself, an illegal pass. In the analogy, like the microwave, like it's circular. It came from me. I threw it back to me. There's nothing outside of me grounding this. You can't do that. This would be a legal pass.
Jokic wheeling into the key. Got it back. Put it up and in.
All right.
Jokic wheeling into the key. Got it back.
So he's got the ball. He throws it up. It hits the backboard. It comes back to him. He can do that. Nobody in the crowd, nobody on the other team said, "No, you can't do that," because it touched something else. As opposed to the first video, it touched nothing else. To put it in the scope of this conversation, you're saying to me, like, my reasoning is coming from my mind, which is not designed to obtain truth. And I'm acting as if I can trust it, but there's nothing outside to verify what I'm doing here. Why do I think my brain actually works to give me truth? It's got to touch something outside of me. And for you,
That's not my
worldview,
argument. That your brain has
okay,
to go, because I don't think you can go outside your brain if
got you.
there's no God. In fact,
Well, no,
yeah,
no, no,
we'll
no.
get into the soul
If
later.
there is a God, though,
So if
that's why
there
I
is a
keep going back.
God, then we don't have the undercutting defeater.
Right.
Because
But here's the thing.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say we have no reason to believe that there's an undercutting defeater to our brain.
Right.
So on no God view, we have an actual reason to have an undercutting defeater. On the there is a God view, there would have to be an argument being made as to why we have an undercutting defeater if there is a God.
Right. But here, my argument would not be that you have an undercutter defeater if there is a God. That wouldn't be my argument. So I played those two videos purposely because in one video, the guy throws the ball back to himself, illegal, you can't do that. In the other, the guy throws it to the backboard. We see it hit the backboard and come back to him. What brought the ball back to the first person is the laws of physics, nothing else. What brought the ball back to the second person is the backboard. To put it in the context of this conversation, show us your backboard. Show us the thing that you're throwing your reason up against to have it come back to you and say, "See, this is why I can trust my brain because God made it work." I'm saying, show us your back. Show us the thing that's making your reason work. And say, "Oh, there's no undercut of defeater. You're not in the position I am. You didn't throw it back to yourself. You're not trusting yourself, your undesigned brain. You're trusting this thing that we all saw you throw it to. It wasn't the laws of physics. It wasn't gravity. It wasn't the backboard did it. What is the back?" And you're saying it's God. And I'm saying, show us that thing that makes you not in the same position that I'm in. Because for me, it looks like you're. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
For me, it looks like you're throwing your reason up too, and because you're saying it's touching God before it comes back to you, I'm supposed to say, oh, then yours is legit. But I don't see your God. I see ancient people who were in the same position that we were in, and they didn't have a backboard. They wrote stories about the backboard, but we've never seen the backboard. So how is your version trustworthy and mine is not when you haven't shown us what's doing it for you?
Yeah. So this is, I get this a lot from non-believers when I share this argument, and I'll tell you why this is odd to me as a response, but I get what you're asking. The argument is essentially an attack against atheism via evolution, natural selection, those combined. And if the response is, well, what about you? Note that only concedes my argument. In other words, I haven't made a positive case per se as here's why there's a God. It's if there is no God, here are the consequences. One of the implications of that is you can't have knowledge, but we do have knowledge. Therefore, atheism is false. Atheism is false. Therefore, God exists. So note on just in the argument alone, based on that logic, I'm not trying to give a reason why my brain is a reliable mechanism designed to obtain truth. All I have to do is run the argument that on atheism, here are the consequences. That's not true. Therefore, atheism is false. So even let's suppose, for the sake of argument, I say I don't know what I bounced the ball off of. That still doesn't save atheism from imploding in that sense. But I go back to what I shared last week. Unless I have a reason to believe that I can't trust my beliefs, I'm justified in it. And I would say my backboard is, again, the logic, the evidence, the reasoning. Does it pan out? When we segue into the soul, this goes into free will as well, because I think the same problem arises. If there is no soul and everything is just what's going on in your brain, then all your beliefs are causally determined in you to believe what you do, and you can't believe otherwise. And then it's the same problem. You cannot get outside this determination in order to verify whether or not your beliefs are true. Because if I'm causally determined to believe what I do, then let's say I go out and do a science experiment to test my belief, and I say, oh, look, the conclusion yields true. The problem is now it's just begging the question, because once again, I'm relying on beliefs that I was causally determined to believe in the first place. So I'm basically determined to believe that my beliefs are true, which doesn't solve the issue. So this is, again, an internal critique of atheism that segues in, or rather is simultaneous that if atheism is false, God must exist. And that's kind of where the argument sits.
I appreciate that. So we can move to the soul. This last thing I'll say on that point. So, I think I just lost it, so I won't. Maybe it'll come back to me in a second. But yeah, so you bring up the soul as, well, no, maybe I will go back. I'll try to grab what I was thinking of just a second ago. If we, because I know you're saying you're not making this argument for God yet. You're just making an argument for why atheism falls apart. Last week, I tried to bring up this point, and I'm not sure how well it landed, because I think I started talking so theoretical that it sidetracked the conversation. But I'm going to try it again here with a little more intentionality. So I don't think it's true that if our brains were not designed, because for me, the problem with that statement is the word designed, because you can't have design without a designer. And so to me, that smuggles God into the conversation, which is why I balked at it, because I'm like, okay, why stick God into it? Why not say an advanced species? Why not say an alien? Why not say, I'm just spitballing when I say those things. I'm not saying I think that aliens or an advanced species exist. I don't know. I threw out the idea that we could be the biological AI of a bygone, advanced species that doesn't even care anymore. Who knows? But to say if our brains were not designed, then they can't be trusted to arrive at truth. I still don't think, even without aliens or advanced species, I don't think designer is the only way you get brains that you can trust. Because one of the things I tried to get at last week was, what if we are such a part of our environment? Like I said last week, we are from what we've been able to tell, we are star stuff. Everything that is around us, it's not like we're it's not like we're alien material. We are part and parcel of the universe. So to think that whatever we formed into, whatever we developed into, doesn't have the ability to understand the rest of what it came from, like, it doesn't make sense to me to say that if there's no God designing it, then we can't trust what these brains are doing. We don't know why the brains are doing what they're doing, but we do know that it's all the elements, all the compounds that are in us are part of this universe. And so to me, that at least buys us room to say, we don't have to throw out the trustworthiness of our brains to just say, oh, this is part of this. It's part of whatever the system is. We don't know yet. We're part of it. And we're doing what the system is doing. To the degree that we're able to figure this out and trust it, it buys us room. I skipped to the end, somewhere towards the end of what you and Dillahunty were in your debate on the soul were talking about. And he made a point that I wholeheartedly agree with. If I can remove things that we can falsify from the table, it at least leaves the table open for us to explore and find out, why are we able to trust our brains? Doesn't mean we have to say we can't trust them. It just means, oh, let's find out why they've been so trustworthy. Why have we been able to make airplanes? Why have we been able to do math? Why have we been able to? Let's find out why, as opposed to say, well, I guess we can't trust them if they're not designed.
Well, I would say because atheism is false. That just, in other words, everything you're saying aligns with my argument. So nothing you've said so far, I would have to disagree with for my argument to go through. And again, it's not just that it's not designed. I can ask it this way: would you grab a magic 8-ball and use it as a compass or a GPS to figure out which way to turn, left or right, every few minutes? Would you use a magic 8-ball for that?
I wouldn't, but I don't think that's comparable to what's happening in our heads.
But sure. But my question is, why wouldn't you use a magic 8-ball for those purposes?
One, because it was designed to give you chance results.
Okay, sure. Yeah, fair enough. Now, with evolution, natural selection, now we have better chance results, right? But all the chance results are aimed for survival. That's the baseline point. It's not aimed necessarily for truth, just survival. And if false beliefs grant survivability, goes back to the microwave illustration. You now have this undercutter and defeater. It's not saying your beliefs are false. It's not saying you can't have truth. It's saying that you have now a reason to distrust the beliefs that your brain is producing. And you mentioned a few times. Yeah, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead. I was going to say, I feel like the reason that we can trust our brains is, to go back to the self-pass analogy. At least the universe is a visible backboard that we can throw our reasoning up against and say, oh, we're part and parcel of this entire matrix. That buys us room to trust what's going on here, as opposed to this, to me, what is a God of the gaps argument, that I don't know why we would trust that.
So it's not a God of the ass argument, because I'm not arguing from ignorance on anything. Everything I've said is based on what we do know. And you mentioned falsifiability a few times. So that is also self-defeating, because you cannot falsify the view of falsifiability. So if something that you hold to cannot withstand or uphold its own standard, it is self-defeating. And that, we're talking about breaking rules of basketball earlier. This breaks a rule of logic. Logical fallacies break the rules of logic. So falsifiability, I think, is not a good standard. It's another, some atheists, some skeptics hold to falsifiability as well. But I think this methodism, the skepticism, methodological skepticism, this pragmaticism, and now this falsifiability all become self-defeating and collapse. This is why I say sometimes atheists go from like one fundamentalism to another. It doesn't help the non-believer's case to appeal to things that we know are contradictory or self-defeating. And this is why, when reading your book, I thought, taking you at your word, if you're looking to go where the evidence leads, I would say it leads away from atheism.
All right. So thank you for that. We covered this well, and I think this was a great recap of last time. Yeah. We spent 50 minutes on it. Let's go to the soul. Let's tie this into the thumbnail says, "Are we souls?" And I just put in the caption, "Is mind over matter?" Your view is that we so. When you say, would you say we are souls, or would you say we have souls? How would you say?
That we are souls with bodies. Yeah.
we are souls that have bodies.
That's right.
Not we are bodies that have souls.
Correct.
Because I would go as far as to say we are bodies that have minds. I think I would go that far. I don't know if I would go as far as to say that we have souls, because souls survive the body, and I have no
Not
evidence that anything like
necessarily.
that takes place.
So
Okay,
not necessarily. So this goes back
Talk to
to, and I'm talking about myself here, not you. It may apply, may not. So even as a Christian growing up, I believe that the soul automatically just meant immortal. Or, you know, if you were to ask your average Christian, what is a soul? They say the thing that goes to heaven. But that's, again, just bad theology based on bad philosophy. I always like to say bad theology can often be traced back to bad philosophy. So the soul isn't in and of itself immortal. I think animals have souls. So having a soul doesn't necessarily mean eternal. But my only point there, without going down that rabbit trail, my only point there is philosophy of mind is such a well-versed area of philosophy. But again, most Christians and non-believers, but, you know, I guess Christians have the bigger blame here, don't really understand philosophy of mind or haven't studied or looked into it. So to say that there is a soul doesn't necessarily or automatically commit you to believing in an afterlife. It doesn't automatically commit you to even being a Christian. There are some non-believers who hold to the existence of the soul. Even Nobel Prize winners that have held to a type of dualism who were not Christian. Other cultures outside of Christianity or other religious views held to the idea of some type of dualism. So it's a misunderstanding to think that if there is a soul, you automatically have to believe in heaven, automatically have to believe in survivability of the body, all these things. Now, I think those are logically consistent with the view of the soul. But all I'd argue is when I make a case for the soul, I make two basic points. The first is that consciousness is not physical. And the second is that I am more than a brain and body. And of course, I conclude that I am a soul. So in your book, you mention a lot of things like everything. I don't want to misquote it. I can pull them up. But basically, you seem to appeal to like neuroscience, or the more we learn about the brain, the more something to the effect of, you can correct me here, that we don't have a reason to believe in the soul because we've learned things through neuroscience, something to that effect. Am I on the right track?
I wouldn't say we learned things. Well, yes, I would say, and this is not just me, Christians. I mean, I think the part you're talking, I quote the Christian Ed Welch, who says he's got a book called "Blame It on the Brain," and he admits many of the things that we used to think were spiritual issues can be traced to regions of the brain. Now, we could say that there's just correlation, not causation. We could say that the soul is working through the matter of the mind, but the brain has been shown to be the source for everything that we've been saying. That's a spiritual issue, or that's a soulish issue. So yes, through neuroscience, through all kinds of science, through biology, through chemistry, we've learned so much about. I mean, here's my contention. I think if the people that gave us the concept of souls, if they had telescopes and microscopes, they would have not invented those ideas. But because they did not have those things, because they could not study what's happening inside of a cell, they didn't know about mitochondria producing energy. They didn't know about any of those things. And so they developed these explanations for themselves. And the soul was one of those explanations.
And I would say that that's just a misunderstanding of history and the history of philosophy of mind. The soul is not a soul of the gaps, if you will, because we can't explain something. The soul is reporting the data based on our conscious experiences and what kind of thing must possess these conscious experiences. So because I've talked to other non-believers who kind of say those similar things. And first, we don't want to fall into another logical fallacy called the genetic fallacy. That if I can show where a belief comes from, it's automatically discredited. In fact, the benzene ring, a German chemist came up with this idea, but he got it by having a dream about a snake biting his tail. Now, the benzene ring it's a real thing, named after the guy who founded it. But just because he had a weird dream that gave him the idea of the chemical composition of whatever he was thinking about, doesn't mean that all of a sudden somehow his science was wrong. So just because we can show where a belief originated, even if I grant that, which I don't, that doesn't invalidate the belief itself. Let's go ahead and say, yeah, let me grant for the sake of argument. But again, to clarify, I disagree. But let me grant that historically is true. Then I would say, okay, therefore what? That doesn't prove there's no soul, and you're not necessarily trying to say that. But it also is not a defeater or an objection or rebuttal to the soul. I can share with you the arguments why I believe in a soul, but I think, and I did find the quote, I was able to pull it up. You said, the more we learn about human physiology, we are finding that the many facets of our inner life, which were once attributed to the soul, are actually functions of the material objects in our heads, i.e. the brain. And then you go on to share a few other things. So this also here, and then you said you quoted a psychologist. I mean, I'd rather hear from the philosophers, right? No disrespect to psychologists, but this is a particular niche field. I want to hear what the experts in that field are saying, not someone who is in a field that's not already in that realm or area of expertise. Nevertheless, this is what's odd to me with these kind of pushbacks, because sure, there is a correlation between my mind and the chemistry and the neuronic firings of my brain. But what else would you expect if dualism is true? If I'm a soul that has a body, it seems odd to me when people are like, oh, but look, if you damage the brain, you damage, the things like memory. And my thought is yes and amen. What would you expect, right? It's odd to me for people to use correlations of the brain to somehow make an objection against the soul. I don't. There is no dualist that I know of that would say, "Oh, if there's a soul, then you're just completely brain dead and there's no neurological activity." Like, that doesn't even make sense to me. It's like saying, if I can destroy my router, it interferes with the Wi-Fi. Therefore, the Wi-Fi is a router, or the Wi-Fi is there is no Wi-Fi to begin with. Like, they're odd objections to me because they're not even objections. They're just a given that any dualist would agree with. No dualist is going to disagree with the fact that, yeah, there are correlations between my thoughts and my brain functions, but none of this proves that physicalism is true and that they're nothing more than a reduced to physical firings of our brain.
Okay, so one of the questions I would have then is, what does the soul do what does the soul do that the brain doesn't do?
Think for one. But before we go there, can I touch briefly on my first point that consciousness is not physical? And I want to see what you say to that.
Sure.
Okay. So in philosophy, you have what's known as Leibniz's law of identity. The longer phrase, if anybody wants to impress their friends tonight with what they heard us talk about, they can mention Leibniz's law of the indiscernibility of identicals, but we'll just call it Leibniz's law for short. According to Leibniz's law, if some A and B are the same thing, then whatever's true of one is going to be true of the other. So, for example, the guest on your show tonight and Eric Hernandez, I'm talking about one person, but using two different labels, right? So according to Leibniz's law of identity, if your guest tonight and Eric Hernandez are the same person, whatever's true of one is going to be true of the other, and vice versa. Now, this gives us a test for identity, because if in principle there could be something true of one that's not true of the other, then apparently they're not the same thing, even if I thought they were. That being said, if the mind is nothing more than something physical that's happening in the brain, or reducible or identical to the brain, then, given Leibniz's law of identity, whatever is true of the mind must be true of the brain, and vice versa. But again, if in principle I can show something true of one that's not true of the other, they cannot be the same thing, and this is trivially easy to do. So take my thoughts and beliefs. Now, my thoughts or beliefs are a state of my mind, not a state of my brain. They're a state of my mind, and my thoughts and beliefs can be true or false. They can possess the property of being true or false. Now, when I have a thought, there's a correlated group of neurons firing in my brain. But here's the catch. My thoughts can be true or false, but my neurons firing are not true or false. And all I need is one example to show they're not the same thing. I'll just do two short ones really quick. Then you look at my brain can be in a state that weighs 3 pounds, but my thought that I'm talking to you right now doesn't weigh 3 pounds. And here's a dad joke coming. While we may be having heavy thoughts in this conversation, we don't need to buy a neck brace when we're done here. My brain can be in a state that measures 7 inches long, but the smell of the rose or the taste of a banana, which is a sensation in my mind, not my brain, is not 7 inches long. It doesn't make sense to say that the smell of a rose is 8 inches long. These are category fallacies. So if all the properties of my brain are physical and all the properties of consciousness are mental and immaterial, then right there off the bat, given the logic, they cannot be the same thing. And consciousness, therefore, cannot be identical or reducible to something physical like the brain.
Well, I wouldn't say that they're the same thing, but I would say that one is the product of the other. So our thoughts can be the product of our brains without our thoughts being our brains. And mind is just the term that we use to encapsulate the things the brain does. So it's not an identity issue that I'm making the thoughts or the mind the same as the brain, but without the brain, I don't think you have the thoughts. But you're saying the soul is doing the thinking with what apparatus? And what does the soul need with brains if the soul is doing the thinking?
So going just kind of taking it piece by piece to clarify then, and I'm kind of simplifying it for the sake of time, but let me ask you this: on your view, are thoughts physical?
I'm almost tempted to say yes, but in a way that we don't fully understand. So I'll give you, for instance, right? Can you hear music in your head when no music is playing?
In my mind, yes.
In your mind, yes. Is your soul doing that, or is your brain doing that?
My mind.
Right. But so what is mind?
So we
Is
define
mind different from soul?
Yes. So you have different doulas holding
Okay.
to different views. My view is that the mind is a faculty of the soul. It's a capacity of the soul. So the mind can be defined in 5 different states. You have thoughts, beliefs, sensations, desires, and acts of will. But to not go too much into a tangent or rabbit trail, the simple point is that consciousness is not physical. Now, if you say consciousness is a byproduct of the physical, well, then we still have to answer the question, but is that byproduct physical? And then that leads into other issues that I won't go into just yet. But the underlying question is, what is the nature of consciousness? It's either physical or it's not physical. And if it's physical, then it should have some physical properties. And if they're, and I'd like to hear what those physical properties are. So I think the first question that needs to be addressed is consciousness itself something physical? I say no. And I've given an argument as to why that's the case.
Yeah. I think consciousness is an abstraction, right? It's an abstraction of something that is like physical. So blackness, right? And it's so funny because for those who are Icopodians, when I had Mr. Biscuit on, are you familiar with Mr. Biscuit?
No, but I think I saw you have Will Smith on, not the actor, but the atheist, and he and I had a discussion on the soul, and he mentioned something like an abstraction too, which is odd because abstractions can't have sensations and thoughts and beliefs, but we can. So I'd say consciousness can't be an abstraction.
Well, so the point that I was making is blackness is not a thing. It's an abstraction from the color black, right? You can see the color black when you can talk about blackness as an abstraction from that real thing. I think consciousness, I don't think consciousness is a thing. I think it's an abstraction from what our minds are doing. Like when we talk about being conscious and then we abstract that into this larger category of, oh, this thing, that thingness, like extrapolate that principle or that ability and almost turn it into a noun, but it's not a noun in and of itself. It's a function of the brain.
So yeah, Aaron Raw, I've debated him as well on the soul. He made a similar claim as that what you're saying, but see, the same problem arises. Functions aren't true or false, but my thoughts and beliefs are. My thought that I'm talking to you is true or false, but a function like an engine running, that's not true or false. So again, given the logic, strictly logically speaking, no gaps argument, no Bible verses, they cannot be the same thing. So consciousness can't be a function of the brain because functions can't be true or false.
But I think you're equivocating there because we're not talking about the functions being the same as the brain. We're talking about the function being a product of the brain.
Okay,
I'm not saying it's the same thing.
So maybe I was misunderstood because I heard you earlier say consciousness is a function of the brain, but maybe I misunderstood that. So then what? So to say though that consciousness is an abstraction, that's the closest thing I've heard you get to kind of a definition of consciousness. I still don't know what that means because again, my consciousness and the states of consciousness, desires, sensations, beliefs, those are things that are going to be grounded and possessed by something. In other words, thoughts have thinkers.
Right.
I don't know how I can be the possessor of an abstraction. So I'm not even sure what that would mean to say.
Well, the abstraction is just the way that we refer to the ongoing work of the organ in our heads. So we abstract all of its work and thingify it, because it's always doing these things. It's always thinking and wanting, and the neurons are firing. And then we take all that work and we thingify it, right?
When you say
And we turn it
is
into,
that sorry,
well,
there might
I'm
be a lag
saying
here.
in our vernacular, because we like to label things as opposed to taking the time, like I said, speaking in shorthand, as opposed to taking the time to spell it all out. To have to say what my brain is doing minute by minute and second by second, it takes too long. So we just talk about the mind as the product of what the brain is doing. We thingify the production of the brain.
So I don't. And now it sounds like you're referring to what Daniel Dennett talks about. He's an atheist philosopher of mine. He says that all this talk is like folk psychology. In other words, we're using words that don't really mean what we're saying. But I think that's false. When you were 5 years old, you felt pain, even though you didn't know anything about neurology and what's going on in your brain when you feel pain. That automatically would disprove what you just said, that we're just trying to simplify what's going on in our brain. Because no, you don't need to know anything about neurology to know what pain is. That's another quality of consciousness that would show it's not physical.
I'm not saying you need to know these things. I'm just saying this is what we end up doing when we try to refer to the things that happen. You don't need to know these things, but I'm saying this is what's going on. And we're trying to make sense of those things, the brain states versus the mental states.
So would you concede that mental states are different than brain states?
I would say, this is another way of saying the thing I just said a minute ago. I would say that brain states produce mental states.
Okay, so they're not the same thing, because if it's producing the other one, they can't be the same thing, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Well, but,
so then
but
now,
once again, if I can, because I think this might be where you're going. This is why I asked you about the music you hear in your head. Is that a physical thing?
No, I would say it's in my mind, not my head.
Right. Well, in your mind. But if it's not a physical thing, what is it?
Mental, because the mental is not physical, which goes to my point.
I don't know if we know how to talk about the things that, like, so here's the one of the things I was thinking about earlier today. The fact that we're able to take impressions of the world around us and then store memories of those impressions, that's what gives us the mental pictures that we have. Like, I'm looking at my computer screen and it's a physical thing. When I go to bed at night and I remember this conversation, that memory is not a physical thing as far as I can tell, but I think it's being produced by physical things, like whatever the chemical concoction is that allows me to take.
Can I just clarify?
Snapshots.
If
Yes,
I heard
please.
you correctly, you're saying the memory itself is not a physical thing. Did I hear that correctly?
I struggle to say it's, I mean, even though I said that, I struggle to stand behind it's not a physical thing, because I think it's being produced by physicals. I think the chemicals in our brains are recalling these pictures. It's almost like the pixels on my screen right now. You're not here, but there are pixels lighting up all over the place to produce this image. I think the chemicals in our brain have that ability to rehearse and refresh those images, those snapshots.
And I'm perfectly fine with that. As a substance dualist.
So I do think there's something physical going on there, though. I think that's a physical thing that's happening.
So yes, the physical can make cause things to happen in the mental, but it doesn't follow, therefore, the mental is physical. So even if you're going to say that consciousness can be produced by the physical, I could grant that. You would still be a dualist of some sort. You would just be something like a property dualist, to where you have the physical causing something mental, but the question remains, is the mental physical? I say no. I've given reasons as to why. But if you're going to concede that the mental and the brain states and mental states are two different things, I would say welcome to the team. You're at least a dualist in some sense, because you now have two things at play here.
I don't know if I'm opposed to being a dualist, in the sense that if you're going to call mental not the same thing as soul, I don't know if we know what we mean by mental, other than we can't necessarily pinpoint it down to where in the physicality it's all happening, but we know that it's happening from something physical. We know that the physical is producing it.
Well, so I don't think we have to pin it down to say it's immaterial, but I would say, again, no dualist that I know of is going to disagree that if you mess with parts of my physical brain, you will mess with parts of my mind. That's a yes and amen. But it's also a two-way street. We know this from neuroscience as well, that, and this goes into free will, neuroplasticity. We know that neurons can change, reconnect, rewire, and stretch in ways they hadn't before. Jeffrey Schwartz, one of the world's leading neuroscientists, who's also a Christian and a substance dualist, one of the experts in OCD research and cognitive behavioral therapy. Here's a short version: is that he has shown that you can begin to think differently, and by thinking differently, you can begin to rewire the chemistry of your brain. Now, note that is only possible if you are something more than a brain, not causally determined by the chemistry and physics in your body. That alone would go to show free will, which I would say requires a soul to be grounded in. So yes, you can affect the physical in order to affect the mental, but you can also affect the mental in order to affect the physical. I'd say it's a two-way street, which is exactly what you would expect if substance dualism is true.
I don't know that that's the case, though. That if you to end up with the desires or thinking differently, and that rewire your brain, even to think differently, your brain has to do this. I think your brain has to be motivated in some kind of way. I don't know how far.
Are you hearing
determinism
Are you
versus
hearing
free
like
will.
an electric sound? I'm hearing it on my end. I don't know if you're hearing it. Sorry, you're muted now. Okay. I can't hear you.
You can't hear me now?
Okay,
One, two.
there we go. I thought for a second the Lord silenced you, but no, I can hear you now.
Are you still hearing the electric thing?
Very faintly, but it looked like whatever you mess with got it going in the right direction.
Okay, I don't hear anything at all.
Okay,
So
there it
in the
goes.
chat, if I'm
It's good now.
okay, good. Damn, I forgot where we were.
I don't know, because
Oh,
you were cutting out toward the end there.
I was going to address what you said about like thinking differently causing the brain to be rewired. But I'm saying even thinking differently takes brain activity. And I think even the brain activity that gets you to think differently, we don't know all the ins and outs of what causes but where do thoughts come from? I know you would probably say they come from the soul.
It depends. I would say
Okay.
that they all happen in your soul, but if you were to put a helmet on me and stimulate my brain to think of Taco Bell, which I love, then my thought would be caused by you physically stimulating my brain. But note how that has nothing to do with whether or not dualism is true. It is consistent with substance dualism, the view that I am a soul with the body. So in other words, when people, which I saw in the book, you seem to kind of like lay heavy into the physical interactions in our brain. But this is where I go back to saying, well, what else would you expect? If there's a soul, yes, you would expect this correlation. Again, just like a Wi-Fi and the router. It's a non-starter for me. It's not an objection. It doesn't move the conversation in any way. So going back to simply that consciousness is either physical or it's not. I'll give you one more to see what you think of regarding this, because I could talk about this all day just on consciousness. But that
I would love to have this conversation on some gummies, on some THC. when I go there, like this is the kind of stuff I think about all the time. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, that unlocks some limitations that your brain may put on your soul. Not necessarily good though. All good. So I have what's called first-person private access to my mental states. In other words, for example, when I think of the color pink, you cannot open up my brain and see pink. When, like you said, I hear music in my mind, you're not going to open my skull or brain and see the music. As a friend of mine said just recently that, I don't need ears to hear music when I'm dreaming. All that to say, these are things that are happening in your mind, not your brain. Now, I have first-person private privileged access to my mental states. You don't. You only have third-person access. So anything physical is going to be third-person accessible. So this case here, anything I can know about this case, anyone else can know about the case as well, because it's not private only to me. Same thing with my brain. Anyone who can open up my skull can know just as much about my brain as I can. In fact, I'll go so far as to say a neurosurgeon can know more about my brain than I do. But here's the kicker. A neurosurgeon cannot know more about my thought life than I do. Because while they have access to my brain, they do not have access to my mind. That's another point to show that consciousness is not physical.
Well, wouldn't that just mean that they have limited access to your brain? It's not that they have access to your brain, but not your mind. They can't, and this is the thing. They are getting, I don't know how true this is. I see these things that pop up on my phone all the time. They are getting to the point where they're able to actually illustrate
Map
your
the brain.
dreams, not just map the brain. No, illustrate you can dream and they could illustrate your dreams. Like, so it's not the case anymore that we don't have access to your private, like what the neurons are firing to do. We're actually able to get access to that now because it's not some otherworldly thing.
So it is, and here's where what you're saying doesn't work, and this is also another common objection. They do have to map the brain in some sense in order to even, and I've heard of that too, where they're trying to image the brain, but basically it goes back to brain mapping. So my father was a musician, and one time he bought us this piano that was kind of old, so it didn't have like the notes written on there. So what he had to do was play the key, listen for what key came out, and then he would write down what key it was, right, on the scales. Now he's mapping the keys, if you will, but note, the keys aren't the same thing. The actual note of the music is not the same thing as the physical keys on the keyboard. If they were, he wouldn't have to play to listen. He would just have to look at it and find out. Same thing with brain mapping and what you're alluding to. Note, they cannot just put something on my brain and all of a sudden see my dreams, even if they are going there. But what they have to do is begin to correlate and map when this neurological activity is happening. The person, the neuroscience has to say, what are you feeling? What are you thinking of right now? And, oh, I'm thinking of puppies and candy canes. And then they document what's going on in your brain. They write it down, and now they can begin to correlate and map out. But here's the kicker. Again, one, they don't have direct access to my brain. It is still private, accessible only to me. I have to report to them. So the only way they can even map the brain goes back to the substance dualist point. I have to convey it to them because they don't have access to it unless I give it to them or convey the message. So even if what you're saying is true, it only goes to prove my point that consciousness is first person, private, accessible only to me.
So let me ask you this then, because last time we talked, you made this statement in passing at the very beginning. You said you don't really concern yourself or don't really care so much about evolution and all that. Do you believe that evolution from common descent is a fact of our reality of how humans became humans?
I'm agnostic on the question. So I when I say I didn't care, I mean, I really don't. I could go either way.
But no, agnostic is I don't know, not I don't care. Do you?
Well, it's about, I'm saying I don't know and I don't care. And I don't have one belief one way or the other.
Okay. So you talked about falsifiability not being a real thing.
No, a good standard.
Not being a good standard. Do you think that if evolution is true, and I'm not even trying to have this conversation, I'm just curious. Do you think that if evolution is true, that it would falsify the Bible's report?
No.
Why not?
Well, one, I can point to many Christians who are theistic evolutionists.
No,
two,
but I'm talking about you.
The Bible. I'm sorry?
I'm talking about you in particular. I mean, I know Christians who reconcile it as well, but for you, why doesn't it falsify the Bible's report?
Because I don't think the Bible touches on that. I don't think it's trying to touch on that. It's not a book of science. It's not a book of trying to give you. In other words, when Moses was writing the Torah, he wasn't thinking about Darwinian evolution, which didn't come about till thousands of years after he existed. And when Christians try to hone in on this in Genesis, I think, why would he be thinking of something that didn't even exist in his time? Again, going back to bad theology and misinterpretation. This is why I say you can have bad. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. When Paul says through one man sin came into the world, and through sin spread death, and death spread to all men, is he talking about something that historically actually happened or no?
So I think so, but note, none of this would stand or fall with when it comes to Christianity. Joshua Swamidass wrote a book, so did William and Craig, and they talk about how there is this bottlenecking and how we can point back to a biological couple that existed. But all that to say,
no, they don't. Well, yeah, go ahead.
So the bigger picture here, though, if there is no God, there is no reason to suspect immaterial things like conscience exist. I've given you 2 or 3 arguments to show consciousness is not physical, which means it must be immaterial. And if there's no God, whether or not Adam and Eve existed and evolution is true, would I would say be one of the last problems you should think about, because now if consciousness exists and it's not physical, you have to find a way to fit this in your worldview. And how in the world did physical processes rearrange themselves to squirt non-physical consciousness into existence? And this is another reason I think atheism doesn't work and collapses. You cannot justify the very thing that we know with certainty that we have, namely consciousness. And once we can see that it's not physical because it has no physical properties, now you have a really, really big problem on your worldview to justify whether or not you have a worldview that has explanatory scope to reality itself.
I think that's very ironic, though, because the Bible exists as it presents itself as having explanatory power, and if it can be falsified, how does this conversation even matter if you're trying to point us back to the God whose revelation of what happened in human history, of how sin came into the world, how death came into, if all of that can be falsified, which I believe it can, and I think even William Lane Craig and Joshua Swamidass, they go to great lengths, unbelievable lengths, to try to make it work with the science, and it doesn't work with the science. You have to push Adam and Eve back so far in the past, or come up with a situation so improbable that it's almost laughable.
So no, Swamidass says it can actually work on a young Earth or old Earth view. He's a scientist.
Yeah, but it's laughable. Who is it? I'll talk about them in chapter 5 and 6 of my book. I actually go through their arguments and their books and talk about even Christian scientists. Like it's hugely implausible, but that's not the point. My point was, if you're saying that having broad explanatory power becomes untenable under certain circumstances, it becomes majorly untenable if evolution is true for the Christian worldview.
No, I would say if we want to keep going back and pushing like the goalposts, I would say it's very untenable that life would even exist to begin with. And there wouldn't, not only if there's no God, there wouldn't not only be a Bible, there'd be no life. So if you want to talk about what has explanatory scope on atheism, you need to, how do you get life? How do you get anything? How do you get matter? How do you get energy? How do you get anything to begin with? Consciousness, morality. There is no starter for that on atheism. On theism, it's all natural and home to the worldview. So if you want to talk about
atheism doesn't intend to answer those questions. Atheism denies the Christian answer or the theist answer to the question. There are other kinds of worldviews that would explain those things, not atheism. It's not intending to explain those things.
I don't want to get into the definition of atheism, but it is chapter 3 in my book where I talk about that, because I think it's a rabbit trail that doesn't need to be gone through. But let me ask you this. No, it's okay. If God exists, if the Christian God exists, did God exist prior to the Bible being written?
Well, there is no prior for him, right? I think I heard you say you don't believe that God is outside of time. God exists in time.
Correct, but yes, correct. But I'm just talking about the Bible itself.
He would exist before the Bible, yes.
Okay, so let's pretend we can falsify the Bible. Note how even if I grant you that wouldn't prove therefore God doesn't exist. If God existed before the Bible, tear the Bible up.
It would prove the Christian God doesn't exist. It would either prove the Christian God doesn't exist, or that the Christian God is okay with telling untruths,
or that people have bad theology. But
that's a cop out to me, though, Eric. Come on.
No, I don't think it is.
Okay,
I don't think it is. Especially when you have good Bible believing Christians who hold to different views of age of the earth, evolution, Noah's flood, and can faithfully back it up with scripture. This is why I say I'm agnostic on the issue. I have friends on both sides of the issue. I've heard their arguments. I think, yeah, it's good. But note, none of this stands or falls on whether or not God exists and Jesus rose from the dead. Those are the two main things that will falsify Christianity. If you can show there is no resurrection or no God, Christianity is false. Other than that, these are secondary, tertiary issues.
We're almost at an hour and a half, but now that you're bringing in the resurrection, I'm like, we got to do a part 3.
I'd like to finish up with the soul stuff.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I got off track because
no, it's okay.
I forgot what even got me on it. There's a reason why I wanted to know what you thought about that, because So the question I had was, so you're open to the idea of evolution being part of our story, part of history. You're open to that. It could be true.
Sure.
Okay. Because one of the questions you said was, how does something like the brain produce these non-physical things? if we could actually say that thoughts or the music in my head are non-physical. I don't know if we could say that, but if they are non-physical, how does something like the brain do that?
Yep.
Well, if you study abiogenesis and evolution, if you study biology and chemistry, all the reactions of chemicals, the even go back to the prokaryote stage of life. I talked about mitochondria a little while ago, like how mitochondria ends up feeding cells, and you get this cooperation of these cells coming together when they used to compete and they used to take over one another. At some point, they begin to cooperate with one another, and for the first time, that's what our mitochondria DNA is: this living cell inside of other cells that didn't die but powers the cell. And you start getting all of these reactions. Like, to me, it's not far-fetched, and I think I said this at the beginning of our first conversation, that what we actually are, at the very least, is complex chemical reactions. How complex? Give us hundreds of millions of years to become more and more complex. To me, I'm open to that being the explanation for what we are, as opposed to positing this thing that we've never seen, we've never
Can I interject here?
Yes, please.
So why would you expect to see a soul if it's non-physical? That's a non-starter. It's a red herring.
Well, I would expect to have some kind of interaction with, even if it's dark matter or dark energy in space. We know things exist because of what they do, or because we're able to interact with them.
No,
and I'm saying,
or because we have them, which is what consciousness is. So, but one, no. So we wouldn't expect to see it. That shows a misunderstanding of the field of philosophy of mind. Two, everything you mentioned about evolution is all irrelevant to whether or not you can get immaterial stuff come into existence. I want to study the people who are actually experts in this field. Like, you look at Thomas Nagel, who wrote a book called Mind and Cosmos, why the neo-Darwinian picture of evolution is probably almost certainly false.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So that's his central argument, is that you cannot get mind from matter. You cannot get matter rearranging itself into more complicated bits of matter and having immaterial consciousness squared into existence. This is not a Christian. This is not a believer.
Yeah, but I don't know that that's true, though. I don't know that that's a representation of what's going on inside of our minds. I think that's an assertion.
Well, no, it's not an assertion. It's a great book. But two, now I can't help but accuse you of having a naturalism of the gaps, where now you're avoiding a position that would, dare I say, falsify your naturalism, and thus you're positing in a hypothetical I don't know argument from ignorance, and we can maybe one day explain the immaterial consciousness. That's a naturalism of the gaps. This is why I say it seems like it goes from one fundamentalism.
No, I think you're putting words in my mouth, because I said I don't know if the thoughts in our heads are immaterial. I've never said that they are. I'm willing to entertain that. I don't know that the music in my head is immaterial. I think that the material, the chemical reactions in my mind that's able to recall sounds, or maybe it's giving me the sensation of what those sounds would give me. That's a physical thing. So I'm not saying that it's actually immaterial.
So I disagree that it's a physical thing, but I want to push here for clarity. So are you saying that you cannot say, or you don't know or trust that naturalism is true?
I don't know how far I would push naturalism, but I do think we don't have reason. I don't think we have good reason to go beyond naturalism. I'm open to the idea, but I don't think I have good reason to go beyond it at this point.
But you just said you don't know if they're immaterial. In other words, if
I don't have reason to think that they are, I think I have more reason to think that they're material.
I gave you three. So if I can put the ball in your court.
I said I don't think we have good reason. I don't think the reason that you gave are good reasons.
I gave you logic, but can I ask you, what reasons do you have to think that consciousness is physical?
Because we have physical minds doing very complex physical things.
Well, hold on, though. You're begging the question there. You said we have physical minds. That's the very thing I'm asking you to.
I meant to say we have physical brains doing very complex physical things with chemical compounds and synapses being crossed and neurons firing. We have all kinds of things happening physically in our heads that we have not even begun to fully account for. And so to say that I have a naturalism of the gaps, I don't mind that, because at least we both have gaps.
I don't think I have gaps.
Where's the soul?
See, so again, a misunderstanding of philosophy of mind and metaphysics. To ask where is a soul assumes a physical property. If the soul is immaterial, you're asking the wrong question.
So the soul is nowhere then.
But not nowhere physical. But I want to get back to. I would
No,
love
no,
to
hold
hear
on.
a positive
Wait.
reason.
I'm sorry. You said nowhere
Right.
physical. Does that mean you think it's
Mhm.
somewhere spiritual?
I think it's immaterial, so there's no
Right.
where to it.
So then that's what I said. The soul is nowhere.
I just wanted to clarify that because people who aren't familiar with metaphysics and philosophy of mind might hear nowhere and think non-existence. Because I find that a lot of non-believers and naturalists have these question-begging presuppositions that they cannot justify, and asking questions like "Where is a soul?" begs the question that the soul has a physical location. So we have to first wrap our minds around the fact that we cannot just assume naturalism. We have to look at the evidence and follow it where it goes. So, so you used to be a Christian. And you don't have to be a Christian to know this, but you know that on the Christian view, God is omnipresent, right? God is not anywhere physically located in space. You would agree with that, right? On a Christian view of on Christian theology.
On Christian theology, I guess, but not on the Bible. On the Bible, I would say that depending on what stage you're in, God does have a physical body. So
Well, it's here in the incarnation, but I don't want to. I don't want to
no,
go
no,
into a
way
rabbit
before the
trail on that.
incarnation. The Old Testament, God has a body. God
Well,
has a body in the Old Testament.
but you studied at Westminster, right? You have a degree from there. You should know that there is such a thing as called Christophanies, pre-incarnate appearances of
No.
Christ.
I'm not
But
talking
again,
about
don't.
Christophanies, nor am I talking about theophanies. I'm not talking well, I am talking about what Christians call theophanies, but in the Old Testament, God has a physical body.
So I don't want to go on that rabbit trail, but
Yeah.
God
When
is
God's in
spirit.
heaven and Moses goes up to the mountains to see God, and he takes the 72 elders up there, that's not a theophany. He's looking at God under
It
the
could be a
dome.
Christophany. It could be a Christophany. But again, don't want to go down the rabbit trail. My point is this.
Yeah.
Just as God is omnipresent and yet has no physical location, we could say in a rough and ready way, my soul is omnipresent to my body, though it has no physical location. It's a causally active power. But I want to go back to,
Hold on. I'm sorry. You say your soul, you could say your soul is omnipresent to your body.
as God is
What does
omnipresent
that
to the
mean?
universe. It has no physical location, but it has causal power at every point. So this is
So
basic theology
go
101.
ahead. You were making a point. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to push you on here on I want a reason to believe that consciousness is physical. So far, all you said was our brain's really complicated. Yes and amen. Therefore, what? Colin McGinn, another atheist philosopher of mine, who says he calls it magic to assume that you can get immaterial consciousness from something physical. But I would love to hear an argument because I've already given 3 why consciousness is immaterial. I want to hear an argument as to why we should think consciousness is physical,
Well,
aside
remember,
than
I
just
said it.
the.
I said I don't necessarily know that it's physical as much as I'm willing to say it's what the physical organ in our heads and it's what our brain consciousness is what our brains produce.
But that doesn't answer the question. Even if I grant that, I still want to know what the nature of consciousness is.
When you say the nature of consciousness, you're really narrowing it down to one or two things, either material or immaterial. That's what you're saying, right?
That's part
You
of
want
it.
to know if consciousness is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I mean, because you have different states of consciousness. Yeah, but I think at the fundamental level, by nature, is it immaterial or is it material? And we're just, and I know because we're at an hour and 33 minutes. There's another argument I have for the soul, for the soul specifically. I don't know if you want to go there, but I do want to hear if you have one. I want you to give one more swing, so to speak, at why we should believe consciousness is physical.
Well, once again, I don't know that we should think consciousness is physical. I think we should think that consciousness is what the physical thing in our heads produces. And we're trying to thingify that. I think it's an abstraction when we talk about consciousness. So I'm not saying that it's not physical or that it is physical. I think the evidence points to consciousness is what we call the thing that our brains does. We call it consciousness.
I'm not even sure what that means because my brain fires neurons. My mind does not. And my mind is not a
Well, when your
neurons
brain
firing
fires
are not
neurons in a
truthful.
certain when your brain fires neurons in a certain way, we'll call you conscious or not, depending on how your brain is firing. If your brain stops firing those neurons, we won't call you conscious.
What is? How do you know I'm conscious?
Because you're responding to me and you seem
So
to
does
be
ChatGPT.
you seem to be responding to either me or like, here's one of the things when we talk about consciousness, you're talking about being self-aware or being able to react to to external stimuli and internal stimuli. So your consciousness could very well be you simply reacting to your own internal stimuli. And that internal stimuli can be anything from chemical to physical lack, or if it's too hot in your house, like you're responding to internal stimuli. That's consciousness.
But that doesn't answer the question I asked about.
Well, you just asked, how do you know? How do I know that you're conscious? I answered that question.
Yes. What was the answer? I'm sorry, I may have missed it.
Because you seem to be responding to external stimuli, meaning me,
okay.
or your own internal stimuli, which is the thoughts causing you to say, I should say this to Brady, or I should ask Brady this.
Now,
you're
but how is that
responding
different
to your internal stimuli.
But how is that different than ChatGPT?
I don't think ChatGPT has internal stimuli.
But why do you think I have internal stimuli? Because it seems
because if I say nothing for the next 5 minutes, I think you'll start saying, Brady, are you there? Brady, are you there? I think your own internal outlook is going to cause you to want to know what's happening.
Could a robot not do that too?
If it was programmed to do that, perhaps, but I think robots are not biological. We are. Robots do not have the innate chemical reactions going on all over their being. We do. And so we have all kinds of internal stimuli that we're not even aware of. And some of it we are. And that's what produces our consciousness.
So I still haven't, though, heard a reason to believe consciousness is physical. And I want to clarify. I know you're simply, it seems like you're saying consciousness is a byproduct of the physical. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which, again, still doesn't answer whether it's physical or material. And I already gave the Leibniz's law of identity. This is Philosophy of Mind 101. If two things in question are the same, whatever's true of one must be true of the other. I can show you that there are things true of the mind, not true of anything physical. That alone should give you, if you're going to follow the evidence where it leads, that alone should point to the fact that consciousness is not physical. This is why a lot of non-believers are starting to move.
But wait, if you could show me things that are true of the brain that are not true of the mind, that doesn't mean that the brain is physical and the mind is not. It could just mean that they're two different physical things.
Well, no,
they can have their own. They can have their own physical identifiers and still both be physical.
I said of anything physical, not just the brain. In other words, okay, let's run with that. Give me one physical property of the mind.
Well, once again, like I said, if the mind is what's recalling these pictures, but it's using the chemical compounds of the brain to do that, that's a physical thing.
The brain is a physical thing, but not the mind. Okay, yeah. And if I unplug the Wi-Fi router, I shut off the Wi-Fi. Unplugging the Wi-Fi router is a physical thing. Doesn't mean therefore Wi-Fi in and of itself is something physical. Or sound. We already talked about this.
Hold on, wait. You don't think Wi-Fi is physical?
I'm using a rough analogy. Let me move to, because I don't know all that much about Wi-Fi. Let me move to, let's do colors and sounds. Colors and sounds. I don't think they're physical. Because I can be dreaming. I can have my ears cut off and still play House of Representatives, the whole album in my mind with no physical waves going on in my brain. That right there shows these are two different things. There may be a correlation. It may be that when I get a piano or a guitar and I pluck certain strings, I can play the note C. There's a correlation and a dependency relation between a musician and their instrument and what's needed to a properly functioning guitar to produce a certain sound, but it doesn't follow they're the same thing, even though there's a correlation. Correlation does not establish identity. For physicalism or naturalism to be true, there has to one has to establish identity between consciousness and the physical, and to merely say consciousness is caused by the physical is not the same thing as making an identity claim. For your view to be correct, there has to be an identity claim made. And so far, I haven't heard one or an argument for it.
All right, I appreciate this conversation. I want to wrap it at 1:40 because I don't want to go too much closer to 2 hours, just so people don't see an hour and 50 or 2 hour minute and think, oh, I don't want to listen to that. So I'm going to try to keep it here. But I really do appreciate this conversation. I really do appreciate your time because I know you're extremely busy. You're doing a lot of great things. I'm going to put in the chat again, if you all could go help out a friend of mine who ended up homeless through no fault of her own. She's working 2 and now about to get a 3rd job. I just put it in the chat. If you guys can go help out Crystal James, she's the wife of former Cross Movement member Enoch, the ex-wife of former Cross Movement member Enoch. We're trying to raise $700 just to get her and her daughter into a place. So it's in the chat. Maybe I'll drop it in the description of the video as well for now until we reach the goal. Eric, I'll give you the last word.
Well, I kind of have.
I'm sorry. I saw a super chat up ahead. Let me go up. Let me go up and read the super chat real quick. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I think it's just one. Super chat from Choke Artist 411. Thank you for the $19.99 super chat. Says, you can't have it both ways, Eric. Facets of the Christian worldview can't be used for evidentiary value, but then have it that their falsification doesn't count against Christianity. Also, atheism is not a worldview. You want to address that real quick?
Yeah, so I'm not using facets for evidentiary value, but then have their falsification doesn't count. So this part, again, most atheists have really bad theology. To be fair, a lot of Christians do too. But you have to understand what makes Christianity true. God exists, resurrection. So this person just doesn't have good theology, whether non-believer or not. Yes, atheism is a worldview. I'm not going to go over that. There's a video on my YouTube channel where I talk about how atheists try to redefine the word atheist to avoid a burden of proof. But I am curious. And by the way, we barely scratched the surface on the soul. We didn't even get to talk about the soul proper. We just talked about consciousness. But you said I'm doing great things. I don't know if that was just kind of pleasantries or if, in other words, if I'm doing Christian
things, when I say great things, you're doing a lot of things that are great for what you're doing. It's great for your purpose. Yeah.
Fair enough.
I don't have to share the worldview to say it. I mean, I'm sure it's.
Hey, I appreciate that.
Maybe I meant to say big things. You're doing big things for. Okay. But either way, I do appreciate your time, and I will give you the last word if you have anything you wanted to put out there real quick.
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think we covered a lot, and again, barely scratched the surface. I suspect the answer is going to be no, but I always want to extend the invitation to pray us out. And if the answer is still no, that's fine. But I always like to at least throw it out there.
Somebody on your channel asked, "Why did I decline last time? If it's nothing, if I don't believe." Well,
good question.
There's a lot of reasons why I don't let Christians pray for me, and I don't. It would be insulting if I told you why. I said this to another Christian before. I said, I don't want to tell you why, because I think it would be insulting. He actually begged me to tell him why, but I don't want to just say it unless you drag it out of me. Why I don't want people praying for me. So
I mean, I'd like to hear it. I got tough skin and I've been insulted plenty of times. But I'll just say too, though, that I mean, again, you know, your channel I highly respect it, but you at least know as a former Christian, it comes from a quote unquote good place. I'm sure you might be able to.
I do. That, yeah. So there's 2 reasons why I don't like Christians praying for me. There's 3 reasons. One, I think it's kind of condescending, not that you're being condescending, but the idea of somebody praying for me is like, wait, you think I need what you have. I don't agree with you. But that's not any of the main reasons. The main reason is because I know when I was a Christian, I used to use my prayers to preach to people. I would say things in the person's hearing that, I thought God could do it and would do it, but I wanted the person to hear it. And I think it's sort of like a Jedi mind trick. If I say these things in your hearing, you might end up in a scenario in your life where if you're desperate enough, you might connect it back to this prayer and start thinking, maybe this is that prayer coming to. I think it's psychological warfare.
So that's manipulative, you would say, right?
I think so, number 1. But then number 2, this is
can I just say that goes back to bad theology, because I would agree with you that would be manipulative, and I would never want to do that. And I'm not trying to fight for a prayer. I want to share my
all good. Other reason why I don't like Christians praying for me is because this sounds bad, but I don't want to think the things that I think about people praying. Like, if I see you talking to someone that I don't believe is there, I don't know that I'll lose respect for you, but I don't want to, because I just think it's silly. And I'd rather not see that so that I don't lose the respect that I have for you. I mean, I know you're a praying person, but seeing it and having to sit through it, I don't want to see you that way. And so
I appreciate that. I would just say, you know, again, cuts both ways, because to hear that consciousness could be physical, even though we have no reason to believe it, you conceded and admitted it could be a naturalism of the gaps. But I still respect you. I just think you're wrong.
All
Even though
good.
I think that's silly as well. So it's like, again, one fundamentalism to another. One fundamentalism.
Hold on,
to
Eric,
another.
real quick.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Would you agree though that, like you say, naturalism of the gaps is silly, but would you agree that history has been a non-ending string of things that we used to think God did, that we keep finding out, oh, here's the naturalistic explanation for that, whether it be lightning, whether it be what happens to the sun at night. Like we've had God of the gaps for millennia, and the God in those gaps keeps getting filled with naturalism. So is it really silly for me to have a naturalism of the gap about this?
So a few questions there. One, yes, it's silly. Two, no, there hasn't been a naturalism of the gaps. There have been Christians with bad philosophy, bad theology, giving bad arguments. And I would yes and amen and high five you to call out these Christians using God of the gaps arguments. I don't use them. I don't like them. I even address them in my book and say Christians shouldn't use them. Two, no, we haven't had a history of naturalism filling in the gaps. Absolutely not. Because there are things.
That's stunning. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So this is why you have a big movement in the academia with atheist philosophers of mind moving to what's called panpsychism, because they're starting to concede you cannot get the immaterial consciousness from physical matter. This is also why you have a big movement in the academia within atheist philosophers and scholars moving to what Eric Willenberg calls godless normative realism, to where he affirms objective morality, concedes it's immaterial, but claims it can supervene on the physical. This is why you have a lot of atheists moving away from these naturalistic concepts, because we're starting to realize naturalism cannot explain it. There are things beyond the physical. So no, I don't think it's been that. There are many things beyond the physical that we can answer that we don't need the physical for. But I think because we live in this naturalized culture, we're brainwashed to think in a naturalistic way. Again, one fundamentalism to another, and we're brainwashed to think in these terms where you have silly things like people asking, where's the soul? How much does it weigh? Or, the shape and size. When they come, it goes over their head that these aren't even the right categories of questions to be asking. So, last thing I was just going to say is so two, when you have a clear indication, because remember, a gaps argument is, I don't know, but I'm going to reject what you're saying and plug in a gap in my ignorance. I'm not just saying we don't know what consciousness is or how it comes, therefore soul or immaterial. I'm saying we know, based on the logic, this cannot be identical, reducible to something physical, because it has no physical properties. That's different than a gaps argument. And for you to reject that would essentially just be to kind of put a blind eye to it and say, cross your fingers, hopefully naturalism will explain this. And I think that is silly, but I still respect it.
I just thought of this when you were saying that there's not been a history of the God of the gaps being replaced by naturalistic explanations. But do you know what the Hebrew word for voice is?
Not voice, unless you're talking about breath, but no.
Voice, vocalization, voice. It is kol. Qol is the way it's spelled out in English. Do you know what the Hebrew word for thunder is?
No.
Would you be surprised to learn that it's actually kol? And I'm curious, why do you think that the same word for thunder is the same word for voice in Hebrew?
I don't know. If I were to speculate, if we're not going to beg the question and assume naturalism is true, I would say because they would think that the voice of God carries power and authority just like thunder would. But if I can, or I'll let you finish that, and I have one more thought.
Yeah, well, the reason why the word for Hebrew in Hebrew for voice and kol is the same thing is because long time ago, when they heard thunder, they thought they were hearing the voice of the gods. That's a God of the gap.
And I would say that that's I can't speak to that, but that sounds silly to me if it is true. I don't think that's the case, but nevertheless, it goes back to the genetic fallacy, which I won't go there, but showing, hey, it originated here. Therefore,
I see Kip Davis in the chat. Kip said, I do. Kip, was that in reference to the Hebrew? Kip, what's up, man? I got to get you on the program, Kip. Yo, I love you, man. Thanks for coming through. You said you had one more thing. We're getting close to 2 hours.
One more
My
thing.
gosh.
So Here is why it's not a gaps thing, because again, I will agree with you that bad arguments by Christians have been put forth, and we are on the same page there that they should not have done that. But that's not what's happening in the academic field and the theological, philosophical fields and circles. But there's a difference. Let's look at one where, let's say, the universe or origin of life, whatever you want to put in there. There's a difference between origin and operation. And I forget what, I want to say maybe 18 or 19 in my book, I cover this concept of origin versus operation. If I ask you to explain a Ford car, and I say you have two options, Henry Ford or the laws of physics, go. Well, you're going to quickly realize that I have to clarify my question. Explain the car's what? Its existence, an origin, or its operation? If I'm going to explain the car's operation, I point to the laws of physics. If I'm going to explain the car's origin, I point to Henry Ford. But note, no amount of laws of physics could ever replace Henry Ford, and one cannot accuse a Henry Ford of the gaps to say the car exists because Henry Ford made it, and then someone say, no, but there's a mechanic, therefore Henry Ford doesn't exist. That's not a gaps argument. That's misunderstanding and bad philosophy on the part of the person who's trying to rebut the argument. I think the same thing is happening here when it comes to the alleged God of the gaps. It's a misunderstanding of a philosophical argument.
I will do my best to appreciate that. Let me give a shout out. My sister Ty Goodwin, thank you for the $4.99 super chats. Thank you for calling out performative prayer for what it is.
Amen, Ty Goodwin.
All right, let's wrap it there at 150. Hopefully we won't turn too many people away with that timestamp. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for your time, man. Let's do this again sometime.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, much love. Thanks y'all for coming through. If you went and supported Crystal James, I appreciate that as well. And I'll catch you guys next week. Peace.